Hi, everyone. Welcome to another episode of Second Act Actors. I'm your host, Dr. Janet McMorty, and I'm still a medical doctor simultaneously trying to pursue a career in acting. My guest this week is Michael Stein. Michael was a actor, writer, director, nightclub promoter turned entrepreneur. He sells tarps, guys, and made multi-bajillion-dollar business out of selling tarps. He's crushing it at this entrepreneur thing. Now, back to actor. He's a hybrid of these two things, I would say. Entrepreneurship plus acting. He has an amazing story. This guy, you'll hear it. This conversation just fuels my, getting pumped up fire about acting and about just, life in general. Okay, technical issues. I was testing out webcams during this time, trying to figure out which one worked best. You will see if you're watching on Instagram, the one that I was using for this interview is not the one that works best. So I apologize. The camera on my side looks terrible. Michael looks great, and that's all that matters. Please enjoy the long shot odds man himself, Michael Stein. I was chatting with earlier was chatting away about his new project. Then he goes, "Oh, I did sign a massive NDA. I don't think I'm allowed to talk about any of that." I'm like, yeah, I don't think you are either, sir.
Well, I'm an open book, so you can ask me whatever you want.
Awesome.
Slice and dice whatever you need.
Sounds good. Yeah, so I was reading up on, obviously, your biography as well, too. And you have such a fascinating life story. So, yeah, tell me your story.
Well, you want to specifically pertaining to entertainment and acting, right? The acting journey?
Yeah, but also you've done some other cool stuff as well. Some neat business stuff as well.
Okay, so yeah, my, I guess I'll start with you heard my bio because I do a podcast called Long Shot Leaders. And because I come from a long line of long shots, I guess my grandmother, and I come from a long line of entrepreneurs. So my grandmother escaped the Russian concentration camps on her way to America. Her dad he was like Willy Wonka. He owned one of the confectionery factories in Kiev, and he had to leave all that because they were killing Jews before the Germans were. So then they left all that. And my dad, entrepreneur, he had a business in the late 60s with a guy with a tool business, but that wasn't doing so well. So he sold calculators in Canada in the early 70s. He left that tool business and he became known as the Calculator Kid, made millions of dollars. And then he had a crazy lifestyle of sex, drugs, and disco in Los Angeles and orgy parties, and just went through his money. That guy, particularly that he was partners with in the 60s, the tool business, he ended up starting a company called Harbor Freight, multi-billion-dollar company, publicly traded. And I grew up around that atmosphere. So I was always wanted to do three things. One is when I was a kid was survive because I'd sleep in the same room with my grandmother until I was 9 years old because my dad, the one thing my mom kept was that home in Encino, and there was no money around, but we lived in a rich neighborhood. So I had to be, stay in the same room with my grandmother and hear that story of survival. So, but basically be an entrepreneur, be an actor, and a stand-up comedian. Because I had the ADHD and the dyslexia and all that. And the way I was, dealt with that was by trying to be funny. So I grew up around entrepreneurship and being the entertainer, being the youngest in the family. And those two things kind of worked hand in hand. And I became a successful nightclub promoter in Los Angeles in my early 20s, number one in my bracket, under my age bracket. And through that, I was able to segue and meet a lot of friends. And one of the friends I met, my first acting job, was meeting Paul Anderson, now Paul Thomas Anderson, who been nominated for many Academy Awards. His first project was called The Dirk Diggler Story, and he and I became great friends. I drove him home one night from my girlfriend and his girlfriend were sisters, and had him rolling one night. And he goes, 2 days later, he calls me up and says, "Look, man, I got an idea for a short film. It's about the rise and fall of a porno star named Dirk Diggler." And I said, "All right, sounds good to me. Let's do it." So a couple weeks later, we started talking about the story, and we did other projects leading up to it. Like a couple months later after that, we started filming the Dirk Diggler Story. That was my first acting role. And from there throughout, being friends with Paul, we were best friends for a long time, to see this ebb and flow of how he got started. I left my nightclub business and tried to become a filmmaker and actor full time, and wrote, directed, and produced documentaries and short films. I did really well. One of my short films made second pass live action short for the Academy Awards, and got me bought by HBO, and got me movie meetings around Hollywood for my other screenplays, but just didn't turn over to a movie deal in this long tour de France of trying to make it in Hollywood, of playing some other parts here and there, and trying to make other films, put myself in the film, to get, roundabout way. I finally said, fuck Hollywood, man. I'm going to, make my own movie. But by this time, all my money from my nightclub business was gone. All the money I put into films, was maybe in debt and broke. So I said, I'm going to become an entrepreneur again. And I wanted to do something on the internet. This is in 2000. So I started a company that has nothing to do with the movie industry. It was, sell tarps and pop-up tents. Those pop-up tents, as a production assistant, when I was a production assistant, I used to put up these pop-up tents for craft service and for Video Village and all that. And I would sell those things too. And the business took off. So within, a year, I wrote, directed, and produced a movie called Love Hollywood Style with Andy Dick and Coolio and Faye Dunaway. And I was acting against two-time Academy Award winner Faye Dunaway. It was only because I made enough money to make that movie. And I almost bottomed out my business making that movie. And that's when I stopped, my Tour de France, experience in Hollywood. And I said, this business is doing so well. I want to nurture this business. And I chose that choice between passion and opportunity. And I decided I'm going to go for opportunity. I'm going to build this business, but I always have the intention to go back and act and do stand-up comedy, which I've always done. I've done stand-up comedy since I'm 19. And I'm always going to go back to do that. But right now, my second act it's going to be my third act. My second act is my business. And my first act was being in entertainment. But I have every intention to do a third act, which is going back to entertainment once I'm, have a financial and a business goal for my business that I've grown, ever since.
Mm-hmm. When you were a kid and having that survival instinct kind of drilled into you from incredible family story, holy crow, were you ever pushed to not be creative? Because it's a very illogical career path for most people, right? And I'm saying that based on very personal experience, saying, come on, the best way to survive is to make money in this country, and the only way to do that is a stable career, and that's not the arts.
I like that question. That's a very high level consciousness question, because you're empathizing with, what really is nuts and bolts of people, because that definitely is what happens. So a couple things. My survival was my hearing my grandmother's story, or my dad was a homeless New York street kid that, lived on the streets when he was 8 years old, or I was an oops baby, in a large family. And my mom would, say this to everybody, as growing up, say, my son wasn't planned. I ran up and down the stairs. I drank, I smoked, I did, and I was like, Mom, you don't have to tell everybody about that. You could just order the ranch or the blue cheese and just, continue without saying that. But I would grow up around those, but she would say that out of love, like, look how much I love him now. So that was a part of survival, is like, look, just to stay alive, I'm grateful for life. Then growing up in LA, born and raised in Encino, I used to play handball with Janet Jackson, or I would, hang out with, Jermaine and play basketball at Encino Park, or a lot of, stars. You grew up around that. And then you feel like this conscious way of saying, well, what do you want to do? Is like, well, I want to be a stand-up comedian. Ever since I saw Jackie Gleason and Smokey and the Bandit, or seeing Rocky, I want to do what those guys do. But then you feel like shit, because you're like, well, everybody wants to do that. I was like, yeah, I don't want to do that. I was just joking around, and you feel guilty for wanting to do those things. So and then also money was such a big thing, because, hearing stories of how your great grandfather was successful, then it was taken away. And then your dad was homeless, and then he became a multimillionaire, but then he lost it all. And, by the time, I made all this money as a nightclub promoter, and then I decided to go for passion. Then I lost all my money too. I was like, I don't want to do that. So yeah, it became a big thing. Those factors do play a part of your psyche, and those were my decisions.
Where did you have family influences or friend influences? I know obviously growing up in LA, you're surrounded by creative individuals, but was there someone or something that really kind of drove that creative push for you? Because the jobs that you did, I mean, obviously acting is very performative, but I would expect, and obviously stand up, like being a nightclub promoter and an entrepreneur is very performative too. Like you have to network and be on stage, kind of.
Yeah. So, mom and dad, just like, my mom looked like Marilyn Monroe. There's a picture right behind you. See that lady right there? That's my mom. She looks like Marilyn Monroe a little bit.
Oh, wow.
And the good looking guy over here is my dad, who's like a movie star, kind of, personality. But there's Don Rickles over there. And the reason why I put him is because my mom had the same personality as Don Rickles. I mean, I grew up with this kind of fast, kind of like, response. And because I had dyslexia and ADHD, my brain would think faster. I went to a lot of psychologists and therapists, and they say, your brain's thinking faster than your lips will follow. But growing up with, especially a mother like that, who was very sharp and quick, you would stumble. I would try to catch up to her. So long story short there is those were my influences, because to try to be as funny as my mother or as cool as my dad, or, and then of course, growing up in LA, even before, I'd say the biggest influence is watching someone like, eventually I already wanted that interest, to be an entertainer or stand up. But by the time I became friends with people that really succeeded, like Paul Thomas Anderson, watching that metastasize in a good way, watching that process, I was like, holy shit, this could really work. Because I felt like, here's an interesting part. I was doing extra work on a movie called Lesson Zero. And I said, oh, look, there's Andrew McCarthy, and there was Robert Downey Jr., and I was like, that's a guy from Weird Science, and I was like, I want to go talk to those guys. But I was hanging out with this good-looking extra for like 3 days. And I remember he showed me his resume, and he worked more days than I did as an extra. And I said to my friends, this poor guy's come out for like Missouri. He's a good-looking guy, and he's so nice, and they never make it. And then like 3 movies later, I realized this guy that I became like best friends with on the set, he didn't show up to my nightclub because I was promoting my first club on that set, was Brad Pitt, and I was like, holy shit. I was like, you just don't believe that things happen sometimes because you're around it so much. And I've seen all ends of the spectrum of the industry. And later on, I always said to myself, another friend of mine named Brad Fleischman, or Bradley Craig, he was on Stand By Me. And I remember in 1986, I just got done with high school, and I was like, I saw his credits. He was in the movie, and he had a good part with Keith Sutherland, who's one of the bad boys. And I said, if I just knew one of those names, he got his name in that credit. If I knew one of those names, then I can get into Hollywood also. And it helps to know people. But even then, I became best friends with one of the biggest directors in Hollywood history. My girlfriend at the time was Peter Guber's dad, Elizabeth Guber, her dad was Peter Guber. He was the most powerful man in Hollywood. And you go through this ebb and flow of like, when you're young, of like, do I want to have a, first of all, am I using somebody? That works on you. I don't want to let them know I want to be an actor because I don't want to feel like I'm using them. And then by the time that you realize, no, I deserve something, I have my own, I deserve this. Then you start asking for things and you realize, no, people are not going to give it to you. Not always either. So then you get like this ebb and flow of like trying to, find a balance of what is right, what is wrong, where do I stand here, how do I play this out, how do I negotiate these things, and that whole thing was my understanding of like, is this possible? Do I deserve this? All that has to do with discovering where do I stand with this, because I'll name drop the last. You could put your broom away after this, after I drop all these names. But one of my best friends, who's been on my podcast, Chris Peters, his dad's John Peters, and his dad and him don't talk. And I'm thinking, well, that's the son, and John Peters is still one of the most powerful producers in Hollywood. But even then, you have to you can't hold grudges, and there's a whole dynamic emotionally, I guess, is what you're asking, what's the emotion attached towards succeeding or trying to, how you feel about, is it, why do you believe in these things and how you're trying to get there? all those things are connected. It's like, you got to try to, it's a long journey, and trying to understand it is a long journey. I advise people all the time. They say, I want to get involved as an actor or, a comedian or a filmmaker. I said, take courses in personal development.
Well, and I think it must be really tricky, especially, anywhere in the industry, in trying to almost prove that you're a genuinely nice person. Because like you were saying about how many people have their guard up because they think you are going to try and take advantage of them, or you're only after them to try and get into Hollywood. And because there are probably so many people out there who are. So how do you, I guess I'm looking for advice for people, make genuine connections in an industry that is rife with not that?
Oh my God. See, these are good questions. This is okay. So here's the thing. I would say that you have to, don't be who you think you should be. You need to be yourself. You need to find that truth. Let that be your guiding light. And you need to have a stream of consciousness of life. First of all, figure out who do you want to be and who you don't want to be. And then hold your ground on what that is. Make sure that it's a good choice. And what is a good choice? Well, in a roundabout way, of the triad of a good choice is it good for me? Is it good for you? Is it good for the greater good? And let that be your guiding light. That's why I say take personal development, because once you start to understand yourself, you're going to need to, that's going to help you with getting into Hollywood. Now, as we see like Johnny Depp and, Heard right now, like battling each other in the court, it's like, well, Johnny doesn't do that. He's a screwed up son of a bitch. And look at, that's beside the fact. That's in spite of, I'm just saying, if you want a better chance to capitalize in this industry, and be cognizant of what you're talking about, an industry that has a culture that can be pretty dysfunctional, or it doesn't mean that like there's guys like Ron Howard, you just know that's a good guy, just know like he's, I don't know. Something just tells me he's not affected like the other guys are, but there is a predominant kind of culture. So know who you are and take inventory of that. And don't hold grudges, and try to always let your guiding light being the best you can be and being natural. Finding that's what I would tell myself a long time ago. I was like, yo, bro, you're a young guy. You're going to want a knee-jerk reaction towards this or that. You're going to be scared. Then you're going to be confident. Then you're going to be overly confident to, you got to find equilibrium. What your guiding light should be. Know who you are, what you want, make good decisions, and being a source of happiness for yourself and others, and hold yourself with integrity. All those basics that you need to turn into physical knowledge, just not conceptualize it.
Yeah, and I think that comes so much from life experience, because and I hear that a lot from these, what I call my second act actors, right? Like people who've lived a life prior to wanting to go into acting. And again, I'm speaking from very personal experience, that I know me in my late teens, early 20s, and even into my 30s didn't know herself at all, and it took my other jobs for me to realize who I now am. And that just comes with great wiseness and maturity and life experiences. So sometimes I think it takes that. But for you, like, how did you develop that, what is, I think, a really great life philosophy? Where did that come from?
Real quick, that's the beauty of your show, by the way, because you touch upon something in your show, is that you talk about, the second act, acting is about selling emotions for dollars. I studied with Eric Morris, who's written 13 books. He's a great acting teacher. He's a disciple of Strasberg and those guys. And basically you need to understand the emotional content. So when you get a written piece and you get a script, you have to understand the parallel circumstances between what the writer was writing and then how you could apply that to the emotional needs that you're going to bring to the piece. So in order for that to happen, your understanding of life, because that was a young actor's thing. I'd get a script and was like, I don't understand what the fuck this is about. And it's understanding what the story or the piece is about, so you could bring the emotional content and the believability there, and then make good choices and dynamic choices. How it works with whether you believe in Stella Adler, which is more recreation, or Strasberg, which is more sense memory. Either way, you have to have an understanding of what has happened like that in your life in the past that you could bring to the piece, and then also what can you recreate. Both of those things are dependent upon life experiences and them taking that. That's why it's so weird. People are so into archetypes, and when you work this other job, it's like, well, that's who you are now. You're the police officer. Like, no, that guy could still be a great actor. He's been studying acting all this time, and he's been a police officer, and that's his passion. Who's to say that like he's not as good as Robert De Niro?
Yeah.
So we all have these archetypes and silly beliefs. So how's that improving? I would say, once again, personal development as an actor, especially, and continue to study acting, continue to watch as many films as you can, understand the filmmaking process, and then understanding what you as a person, and constantly, how does that pertain to the written piece, in the script, and how would you deliver that? How do you interpret those things? All that's really important, and that's how things have changed, from a young actor to an older actor. I think older actors are so much better than younger actors, unless a case like Faye Dunaway, love her, but she had to use hold cards when I acted with her, like De Niro and Brando and Godfather 1 when he held the piece of paper on his chest, because these guys were like, it's a smaller film. I'm only getting paid a certain amount. I'm not going to, but that aside, these older people, I think older actors make better actors. I think you get better, unlike stand-up comedy, which is more timing, stimulus response, and trying to be fast, which I think your brain's a little sharper. I definitely think that acting is better with age. I don't know if that answers your question. I think it does.
Yeah, absolutely. And has there been anything that you've noticed that's either different or surprised you now that you're coming into acting again after kind of ebbing and flowing through it?
Yeah, one is as far as the business, there's a lot more opportunity, in the sense to get work. But the work is not like, there's more parity in the industry now. So there's a lot more work, but like, let's say you got a job back in the day and my day, like, let's say the early 90s, right? It's like, holy shit, you got a part in a movie. You're going to be able to segue that into more movies a lot, because that's really great exposure. But it's where now, there's so much more parity, and you can see a lot more actors out there, and the pool's so big that they might not get necessarily some work after that. It's harder, but it's easier to get some work, but it's harder to get work after it would be easier to get work once you had a decent part in a movie and you could play that and ride that wave a little easier. So those are the things that have changed there. And nothing's changed with, with TikTok and Instagram and that. It seems like a lot of people are getting opportunities that don't have the craft, because the funnel that you'd have to go through back in the day, your craft. And there was also something in the 70s, coming out of the 70s and 80s, struggling and going to Joe Papp Theater and, maybe doing a off Broadway play on Wooster Street with William Dafoe's, Wooster's Players and all. That was nitty and gritty and dark and cool. And now it's like, I did a TikTok and I'm getting play off of that. And like, I got casted for this and you suck, but that's all right. I really don't care. I mean, I don't have rules. That's another thing. You can't be bitter. It's like, but that's awesome. You got a job I think that's the differences that happen now.
Yeah, it's funny. I was chatting with somebody a couple days ago regarding like YouTubers and TikTok. And again, it makes me feel like I'm like an old lady, but she was saying she produced a film and she was a producer on it and had no decision making at all in the cast. And they casted a very, very famous YouTuber and didn't know how to act. Lovely person, but didn't know how to act. And their movie was not successful. And they were like, we thought it was going to be such a success because she's so famous on YouTube. It's like, well, one, she can't act. And two, people who watch YouTube don't go to movie theaters. They watch their content on YouTube. And it was like this eye-opening thing for this production house being like, oh, like, yeah, that's where I think this is where it will end, right? The ending of YouTubers and TikTok. Like, their audience doesn't go to movie theaters. They don't sit down and stream Netflix. They'll stream YouTube. So, yeah, it's just not going to work. It's not sustainable.
Yeah, that's a great subject also, because I have a 16-year-old daughter and a 13-year-old daughter. And they're like, I'm like, my 16-year-old, her film acumen, because I'm like, we've been watching, she took to it really well. And she's seen like On the Waterfront when she was like 5 and understood it.
That's good parenting.
She digs it, man. We just watched One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest and she analyzed it afterwards for like 45 minutes. But the reason why I bring this up is she goes, Dad, on the other side, she goes, Dad, you understand, the big stars in my world are not the actors. You know, they are for her personally, but her world that she hangs out with, she's like, no, she's like, there's influencers, you know, there's that part of the pool has taken it as to where in the day, you know, I could name everybody or every Academy Award winning film since 1967, since, you know, I was born to let's say 1989. But that's a thing. But now it's not so much because there's so much content and so it's been spread out. And I'm saying that's bad. I'm saying the world's just shifting into different things. There's always going to be acting. There's always going to be movies. There's always going to be, but the pie is getting kind of mixed up in a little thing now with, you know, with like Stranger Things is taking a big portion of like, you know, that market share for like those kids at that age instead of going to the movies. It's not always going to be only Spider-Man and there's so much in YouTube and TikTok and all the different directions. There's only a certain amount of hours a day. So it's all getting a lot more opportunity for everybody, a lot more parity, a little more dilution. And we're going to have to see where everything kind of shifts out in the next 10 to 20 years.
Yeah, it's going to be fascinating, I think. I'm excited to be part of it.
Yeah, absolutely.
Is there anything that you've noticed that you've been able to bring in from your prior careers into now your acting career? Besides everything, probably.
It's all interrelated, you know, so everything, you know, it helps my entrepreneurial career. I mean, I've grown a business, you know, for 22 years now. I started this business to make a movie. And you know, how you deal with, you know, how I produce my own commercials for my business. I didn't want to be a filmmaker, but I wanted to be an actor. So I made films so I could act in my movies. And that taught me how to be a writer. And now I write all my content. And I all this stuff is interrelated. I really wanted to be a stand-up comedian before I did anything else. And how to win friends and influence people, I do that through stand-up comedy, you know. So all these things are like juggling, and you get better at all of them unless you drop them. I don't drop anything. Like even now I don't do stand-up. I'm going to be doing stand-up, you know, soon, but I'm building a big business and it keeps on growing. So I have a plan on an exit strategy and how that's going to look and what we're doing next. So I'm planned out, but at the same time, you damn well better believe I'm like recording jokes on my iPhone when they come up or something. I'm building a library. I'm strategizing for what I'm going to do after certain chapters. And all of these things help each other. So there's everything I can get specific, but like, you know, management, you know, producing films, you know, is no different than producing a business, you know, production on a movie. The more you prepare, likewise with acting, likewise with stand-up comedy, success, not just that, you know, Eric Morris is in his book, No Acting Please, let's say 95% of acting is preparation. 95% of success is preparation. And for an ADHD guy like me, it took me a lot. I found out I had that like later on in life. I was like, holy shit. Every time I like over prepared, I was more successful, you know, because everything was, you know, strategized and put in the right place. So they all help each other. And that's why there's one rule that people also, like, you know, anybody that's working out there, people that listen to your show, people are driving right now going, I'm doing that, but how am I going to do this? It's like, when you learn how to do all these things, don't worry about, you know, the archetype of what you're supposed to be. They're all interrelated. So you could work as being a police officer just as hard, and that will help you strategize one day, you know, your acting career or filmmaking or being a singer or whatever it is, because it's all about execution, time plus effort, and then preparation. And the more, you know, you understand on how those processes work, it'll help, you know, your entertainment career.
I love that because I think, well, I know as actors, we get a lot of advice from a lot of people, you know, good and bad, well-intentioned or not. But the most common piece of advice I've gotten as someone who has another job from people who are just career actors is, how can you expect to be a successful actor when you've got your feet in two different buckets and you're trying to balance those two? If you're trying to balance that, one of them, my medical career, I'm a doctor, or my acting career, one of them is going to not get as much attention and then falter and fail. I don't know what are your thoughts on that?
That's a great thought. I think about it all the time. It's wonderful to really be able to do 100%. You know, I look at other comedians like, you know, cause I did my last stint to comedian, I was still doing my business and it was still growing crazy, but I think it was like 2010, 2011. I was performing at the Belly Room, the Comedy Store, like consistently, and I'm getting fucking great. I mean, somebody drops a glass, I got 15 comebacks. I mean, I see the pitches coming, and they're like 95 mile per hour fastball seems like it's like 40 miles. When you get good at a craft, that things slow down, right?
Yeah.
Things where you move fast and then it slows down. And I was like, if I could either go on the road, I got 2 kids, family's a priority for me because I didn't grow up with that. So then I could either take that route and my craft is going to get even better and better, because why wouldn't it? Yeah. But you do have to sacrifice that. There is something to be said about that. Mm-hmm. But you do what you can do, and you try to do as much as you can with the greater good and the overall goal. You don't want to say, well, I don't know. I'm a big believer in dates. So I think that you should definitely give yourself deadlines and certain things for, whatever your goals are. And I think that there is a compromise there, though, when you can't spend as much on your craft, that it's going to fail. So it's up to you. If you're a doctor, it's up to you at 9:00 at night to do something every day to stay connected, to get your reps in, to make sure that your instrument is still somewhat in tune. Might not be as tuned as, let's say, Dustin Hoffman starving on the Lower East Side when he was in his early 20s, only doing acting. Yeah. But it still could be at the best it could be, and that's what you got to go for.
Mm-hmm, absolutely. And that recognition of this is your choice. Like this is your life. You can choose to be an actor and a doctor, or an actor and entrepreneur, or you can be one or the other. Like, that's the best part of living where we live in this society. We have that privilege and the luxury. So if one thing's failing in your mind, I don't know, do something about it.
And what's great about that and great about your show? You keep on doing what you're doing, and that'll hopefully change the archetype. And one day when you go on an audition and they say, well, you're older and you've only been doing this for how long? I say, no, I've been doing this for a long time. I've just been doing other things. And people are like, okay, I get that. As opposed to the archetype, which I don't know if we'll ever get over archetypes, and what people expect out of, that person should be like this. Mm-hmm. Or I love Daniel Day-Lewis. He's amazing. Is he the greatest walking actor that ever lived? I mean, I think he is. But there's got to be somebody else out there that could be a nurse, who's studied acting since they were 5 until they were 22. And now they're doing something else, but they constantly, and they're going to try it again, maybe when they're 48.
Yeah.
Now, and then they're going to do it 2 years straight. Who's to say that person is not just as good in hitting a 10 on a scale of 1 to 10 as Daniel Day-Lewis is? Mm-hmm. But our archetypes, I believe in archetypes and how we think things should be is what, and stereotyping and typecasting, that happens.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think I always get told, you have to find out what your type is and then push that to its advantage, because there are so many of us in this industry trying to get into it. I rarely, if at all, will get cast as the doctor, because even though I am one in my real life, I don't look like the archetype that people are used to on television of an older white male doctor. But, okay, yeah, I look like a 40-year-old bit tired soccer mom. I go, even though I'm none of those things except for tired. I go out for those roles all the time. So yeah, I guess it's should we just be taking ownership of that, or do we need to change that?
That's a great question too. I like these questions because you're tuned into all the psychological dynamics that, because seriously. So, well, the thing is that there's 2 things. One is there is some science to that. It's you're not going to change people's mind, and that tendency is never going to change. Yeah. So you really need to figure out, where do you really stand? Because you want to be cognizant of who you really are, or the type of product that you are, or how you would be cast. Certain things you're just not going to be casted for. Yeah. So you need to be cognizant of that. Mm-hmm. At the same time, my modus operandi is to say, a long time ago, I made a decision and say, look, whatever you are, you need to find a dig for that shit, and you need to bring it out and just be transparent, and where the chips fall, that's where they fall. And I don't care how cool it is, or how I don't care what, you just need to, and or sometimes how embarrassing it is, So there's great actors. Oh, here's another name, Vincent Gallo, who Buffalo 66, who made me throw up in the Lower East Side one time. He's a vicious bastard. I believe that he's always so worried about being cheesy. And if Vincent hears this, hey, fuck you. I love you. Last time I saw it, we get along great. but he's a tough cookie, so he could handle this. Sometimes, because he's such a cool dude, I'll say that, but he's so cool and he's so avant-garde and he's so New York and he's so that guy that sometimes you got to be careful because the power of the cheese, you got to be careful because sometimes you don't want to be, you're trying to be so not cheesy that it's kind of cheesy how cheesy you're trying to not be, so I think that you just need to, my other half of me is you got to be yourself, whether you're worried that it's embarrassing or not. You don't have time for that shit. You just got to give it up and find the truth in yourself. At the same time, though, the other end of that is you got to market yourself and you got to figure out who are you, because you don't want to waste your time going in directions that you're not supposed to be in.
Yeah, for sure.
This is a business.
Yeah. Do you have a crazy, funny, or memorable on-set story?
Well, here's one. I think about it all the time because those inversion tables that you use for your back. Yeah. So I was just thinking about this. I don't know. It just popped in my head. I didn't plan for these questions, but I was hanging upside down this morning, and I hang upside down every day, sometimes twice a day, because it's good for your back and your neck, right? Released, for the vertebrae. So in Dirk Diggler's story, there's a part where that girl, Rusty Schwimmer, she was in Twister. She was in a lot of movies. She played Candy Girl in the Dirk Diggler story. And Dirk Diggler had to go on an inversion table, and hang upside down while she's standing over him. So you could picture the situation here. So when I'd never been on an inversion table that time, and I'm sitting there and I'm about to fall off, because I don't feel like I'm strapped in heavy enough. I got long hair at the time. My hair's like upside, it's like dragging on the floor. And I'm like like long hair. I'm like about a foot away and I feel like I'm going to fall off, and I'm like sitting there screaming. And then this guy, Art Morgensen, who's an actor, character actor, you've seen him. I said, I think I'm going to fall. He goes, we really don't give a fucking shit. Just do the damn scene. And I'm thinking, well, this is just a little video, independent film thing, but I guess that's what Hollywood's like. Who gives a shit? Just do your shit, And I look back on that and go, why was I making such a big deal about that? But I never hang upside down before, so that was the first time I hung upside down. And every time I hang upside down for my back, I think of that. So that's one of the funniest things I guess I can mention.
Is there anything that you are looking forward to this year? Anything coming up for you?
Well, I'm an entrepreneur right now. So one of the things I'm looking forward to is I'm launching a new brand at the end of the year. It's called Bolator. And hopefully it'll define its industry the same way like Yeti defined the cooler. So it has nothing to do with Hollywood or entertainment, but it's basically a backpack that turns into it's also a soft cooler that turns into a tarp, that turns into something else, that turns into something else. It's really cool. And we've got a whole line of that coming out. So that's like something particularly this year that I'm really looking forward to. And I'm going to be shooting the commercials for that. It's like, it's good. I get to, do some filmmaking and acting and that. So that's really fun. I'm looking forward to doing that. But the other thing is that I promised my friends, I keep on saying this, but I promised my friends that I would start doing stand-up again and pushing it back to the end of the year when I'm done with the launch of this product line. Because there's no excuse, because a comedy club on Thursday nights just opened up. I live in Georgetown, Texas, by the way. I'm not in LA right now.
Oh,
I moved out to Austin. Yeah, just in Austin. I'm north of Austin, about 25 minutes. Nice. And coming from Encino, living out in the country where I do, it's like, would you want to talk about a fish out of water story? But anyways, I'll be doing stand-up again. So that'll be fun.
That's fantastic. Any final kind of words of advice or words of wisdom for anyone thinking about getting back into acting or starting acting kind of after a first act career?
Well, I would say, prepare, strategize. I know any people listening out there might not be friends with spreadsheets, but like I would actually take an Excel spreadsheet. I would be very methodical about it. And I would say, okay, here's my date, when I drop dead date that I really want to do this, but then also think about the scope of work that you have to do. It's like, I got to get in shape for acting. I got to start studying. I got to do this. I got to get pictures. I got to get a resume. I got to get this. This is my strategy. This is where I'm going to go. I would put all these dates down on a milestone spreadsheet. I'm not asking you to be a business person, but I'm asking you to like, just kind of strategize a plan, get scope first. Then before, even as you're doing this process, truly ask yourself, how serious do I want to be able to do this? How much am I going to convict towards this? And get your mind and your body and your emotions attached towards what you're visualizing. because it's going to take a lot of attrition in this business, because you're going to drive 25 minutes to the audition, or you're going to do an audition tape now. Then nobody drives auditions. You're going to submit your file, of your audition. You're going to take time to learn the sides and all that, and you're going to invest some time, and you're going to do, what do they say, 30-to-1 ratio, that 30 audition, to one, that you should expect 30 auditions for one job.
Yeah.
That's pretty high, but I've always heard that. Yeah. So be prepared for that, emotionally prepare. And then, don't give yourself excuses, go for it. And don't keep rules for yourself, and be prepared for the pain. Rejection, the pain, the pain I'm talking about, right?
Oh, yes, absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. Thank you, everyone, for tuning in, and thank you, Michael, for being my guest this week. I am so sorry about the webcam issues. That is not the correct one to be using. I have found it. It's the one, currently, that I'm using now. Anyways, thank you, Michael, for sharing your inspirational long shot story with us. I really appreciate you taking the time. I know you're a busy guy. I hope you will all tune in next week for another episode of Second Act Actors. Bye!